Episode 1, April 14th, 2020. Hey, welcome to Whiskey Wednesday with Rick. We're going to call this episode 1, since we're just starting to do it on Wednesdays only. Today, we're going to drink one of my favorites, Four Roses Single Barrel 100 Proof. A friend of mine, Lewis, I think it's one of his favorites too, so we're doing it in honor of you, Lewis. Okay, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to start the first Whiskey Wednesday with is all whiskeys. No, how's it going? I'm sorry. All bourbons are whiskey. Okay, but not all whiskeys are bourbon. And that's because bourbon is the most regulated spirit, I guess called spirit, out there. Whiskey, there's like four regulations to be called whiskey. 100% grain, has to be distilled at below 190 proof, has to go in oak containers, and it has to be bottled at least 80 proof or higher, okay? Where bourbon meets all those requirements, but there's even more with bourbon. First of all, bourbon has to be made in the United States. Back in 1964, Congress, the United States, made bourbon the native spirit of the United States. So bourbon can only be made in the United States. People think you can only make it in Kentucky. That's not true. It can only be made in the United States. So give me a spot to elbow down here. And the other thing is, it's made of grain, but it has to be at least 51% corn. It has rye or wheat, and always barley. Barley is used because of the enzymes in it to turn the starches in corn to sugar. Okay, and then they add yeast, and that creates alcohol. But anyway, then it has to be distilled below 160 proof. Then the reason for that is at 190 proof, it's pretty much all alcohol. You lose the flavor of the grain, all the characteristics. Where at 160 or below, you keep all those characteristics of the corn and the barley and all that. Not so much the barley, but the wheat and the rye and the corn. You keep those flavors and characteristics. And it has to go in a new charred oak containers, okay? And I'll talk later on in other series about why, but then it has to be put in those oak containers at 125 proof or less, okay? And the last one is number 6, because there's like 6 of them, is that you can't put any additives in it. Like this here. A lot of people like VO, Seagram's, Crown Royal, and all those. And those are called blended whiskeys, okay? And they have their rules too. But blended whiskeys, they distill all the grains separately, blend them together, and then in order to get the taste and color that they want, they add flavoring and coloring to it. So you're not getting a pure natural product. This is a pure natural product. This is made in America from American soil. The grains, the trees, everything that goes into making this, making the barrels, the staves, and the metal that holds the barrels. There's no glue or anything on these barrels. These barrels are all put together with these metal rings that go on there, and that's why it's all American. Okay, so if you're gonna buy American, it's a good product to start with. Okay. The other thing is, as we go on in this series of Whiskey Wednesdays, we'll get into some stories about how Four Roses got its name and why we use charred barrels and how charred barrels got started and the history of why it's called bourbon. But for now, I'm just going to take a sip of Lewis's favorite, Four Roses Single Barrel. Good stuff. Well, that's all for today, folks. See you next Wednesday, hopefully. If you have any comments, please tell me. Ask me what, if you got a question, ask me what you want to ask me. But remember, American made. Let's start buying American made. Huh? Let's quit depending on Japan and China and all these other places. So, let's buy American. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like the tequila. I like the agave and all that. But my favorite, bourbon. All right. See you next week. Adios.